So for this season, I decided to cover one college football team for the entire college football season. Now, I'm still going to do those weekly predictions. I'm still going to do those top 10 rankings. I'm just adding another element. And I've decided to cover the Nebraska Cornhuskers because I have so much respect for the Nebraska Cornhuskers fan base. They're the best and loyal fans, not only in college football, not only in football in general, but in all of sports. 368 consecutive sellouts in Memorial Stadium, going all the way back to 1962. So, despite coming off back-to-back 4-8 seasons, Nebraska football fans continue to remain loyal and have optimism for seasons to come. So, the 2018 recap for Nebraska football, like I just got done saying, they're coming off back-to-back 4-8 seasons. They had an 0-6 start to the season last year. However, they did have some close games against Colorado, Troy, Northwestern, Ohio State, and Iowa. Against Colorado, they fell behind early in that game, 14-0. And Adrian Martinez did get hurt in that game. He was injured in that game and didn't return for the final drive, which they were forced to have Andrew Bunch at quarterback for that final drive of the game. But I think with them going behind 14-0 early on, I think that's because they didn't have that first game against Akron. Because when you have a team like Nebraska that's young, however, there was some upperclassmen leadership on that team. But when you have a young team like Nebraska and you have a freshman quarterback, you definitely need those reps. That's why sometimes you see the Oklahomas, the Ohio States, or the Clemsons, or the Floridas, or the Florida States occasionally, maybe not necessarily all the time, but occasionally you see them schedule these relatively easier opponents to get their team momentum and reps for weeks to come. And I think that was Nebraska's problem in that game. That was at least one of them. Not saying it was the biggest one, but I think that was a huge reason why they fell behind early 14-0 in that game. I think maybe Nebraska was a little bit anxious going out there to begin that game. That's why they fell behind 14-0. And they showed signs in that game. They were able to stay in the game. They, in fact, had the lead in the game, but they surrendered the lead late in that game. Against Troy, that was when Adrian Martinez didn't play in that game. They had Andrew Bunch at quarterback, and they made a lot of mistakes on offense. Northwestern, that was a game Nebraska should have won. They had a 10-point lead late in the game, but ended up losing in overtime. Ohio State, that was a game where if maybe one or two things go differently for Nebraska, they potentially win that game, upset Ohio State, and end any chance they had of going to the college football playoff last year. And against Iowa, they just gave up that game toward the end. I think, kind of like the Ohio State game, if maybe one or two things go differently, Nebraska probably wins that game. Their offense did get better towards the end of the season. Adrian Martinez definitely showed improvement at the end of the season than in the beginning. And right now, Nebraska football has a lot of momentum at this point. So Nebraska is entering year 2 of head coach Scott Frost. There is some questions about the running game because Maurice Washington, there's questions whether or not he's going to play for Nebraska this season or even ever again, if he's going to be kicked off the team. But I'm thinking Dedrick Mills is going to be the starting running back for the Nebraska Cornhuskers because I think he fits in Scott Frost's offense pretty nicely. The defense has to show improvement because last year their defense was 94th in total defense by giving up an average of 433 yards a game. 96th in rush defense. And that's going to be a huge problem because on Nebraska's schedule, they go up against Ohio State and Wisconsin. Those are their 2 big games this season. And they have what I think are top 5 running backs in college football. They were 78th in pass defense. They were 103rd in third down conversions and 100th in the fewest penalties. So they were a heavily penalized team last year. As for the Nebraska offense last year, this offense, they have momentum going into 2019, but last year, the offensive line, they were 77th in sacks allowed. However, they were 25th in total offense, 28th in rush offense, and 51st in pass offense. However, they were 85th in third down conversions. And if you want to be a team that competes for the Big Ten championship, you can't be 85th in college football in third down conversions. So the 2019 Nebraska Cornhuskers football schedule. So this schedule, it looks much easier than in years past. There's no Michigan, there's no Penn State. There isn't that many difficult games, at least on paper, but anything can happen in college football. There's a lot of time between today, when this is being recorded, and once Nebraska gets their opponent for a particular week. So the season begins for the Nebraska Cornhuskers August 31st against South Alabama. And I think this is going to be a win for the Cornhuskers. The question is, how much will the starters play? However, I'm not going to question South Alabama. I'm not going to doubt them because they are capable. They have the ability to pull off an upset. They did upset Mississippi State a few years ago. But however, I think Nebraska, they have a lot of momentum at this point. And I think that Nebraska is going to get the win here. So I think they're going to move to 1-0 to start the season. They open the season with a win. Week 2 against Colorado. This is a road game against Colorado. The altitude could be an issue. This is the first road game of the season. But I think Nebraska will be very motivated in this game because this is going to be where I think is going to dictate how the Nebraska football season goes. I think if they win against Colorado, I think it's going to be signs of a promising season. If they lose this game, it could be another disappointing season for Nebraska. But I think Nebraska is going to win against Colorado. I think they're going to get their vengeance from last year. So they win their first 2 games this season. Week 3 against Northern Illinois. Nebraska did lose against Northern Illinois the last time these two teams faced off against each other. And that led to the firing of athletic director at the time, Sean Eichhorst. And this was ultimately what led Nebraska to that 4-8 season back in 2017. But I think they get the win this time around. Although Northern Illinois, they have a history of playing competitive against Big Ten teams. But I think Nebraska gets the win. Then we go on the road at Illinois. We're at that point now. And I think Nebraska gets the win because Illinois, they are a bottom feeder to the Big Ten. So I think they move to 4-0. And now we are at the Ohio State game, a game that is going to be probably the game of the week. I think that is going to definitely be that game of the week, especially if both the teams are undefeated at this point. So this could potentially be maybe a top 15 matchup. Probably game day is probably going to be in Lincoln that week. So this is going to be the game that I think we're going to see how good Nebraska football is at this point. So I think that Nebraska, I think this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be very competitive. But I think the difference is going to be, I think maybe Nebraska makes a mistake and it may cost them. I think it's going to be very close. I see this being an offensive battle. Ohio State's going to have Justin Fields, the Georgia transfer, under center for the Buckeyes. But I was given a tip by a loyal watcher of this channel, and he thinks that Justin Fields is overrated. And that could be the case, but you got to look at what Ohio State has around them. This is the first year for Ohio State's new head coach, Ryan Day. And I think this could be very similar to when Lincoln Riley took over at Oklahoma for Bob Stoops. You got to look at what Ohio State has around them. They still have J.K. Dobbins, who is, I think, probably the second best running back in the Big Ten behind Jonathan Taylor. Probably the 4th best running back in college football. Maybe even top 3. And Ohio State returns 9 starters on defense. Although Ohio State's defense was inconsistent, I think that Ohio State is going to show up to this game. And I think it's going to be very close, but I think Nebraska loses this game probably by 1 touchdown, maybe even one possession. So Nebraska gets their first loss of the season, and now Northwestern at home. I think Northwestern will put up a fight because Northwestern's going to have Hunter Johnson at quarterback most likely, one of the quarterbacks from Clemson that transferred. So I'm not going to doubt Northwestern, but I think Nebraska wins against Northwestern. They get a vengeance for the loss last year, a game they should have won. And then they go on the road at Minnesota, and I think they get the win. Although Minnesota has been getting some talks of a team that could fly under the radar, but I think Nebraska can fly under the radar too. And I think Nebraska wins. Then they have the bye week. After the bye week, at home against Indiana. I think that's a win, no doubt. I think Nebraska wins another one. Then on the road at Purdue. Now, Purdue, they are a team that is not to mess with at all. Nebraska lost to Purdue last year. They were blown out by them. Purdue also blew out Ohio State last year. And Purdue has who I think is the most versatile and most talented player in college football in Rondale Moore, who's only a sophomore. But I think there's ultimately more than one player on a team. I think Nebraska gets the win against Purdue. So then they're at home against Wisconsin, and I think that Nebraska's gonna have a hard time stopping Jonathan Taylor. But I think Wisconsin's gonna have with Wisconsin's new quarterback because Hornibrook has transferred. I think they put pressure on the quarterback, whoever it's going to be for Wisconsin, whether it's going to be the freshman quarterback or the junior quarterback that hasn't seen much action. I think Nebraska gets the win. I think if they stack the box against Jonathan Taylor and force the quarterback to have to make plays, I think Nebraska's going to win. And I think Nebraska does win at this point, but things can change from now until November 16th when this game takes place. Then they go on the road at Maryland. And Maryland, they're another team that's not to be messed with in college football because they're capable of pulling off upsets. They've beaten Texas in back-to-back years. They took Ohio State to the wire last year. They lost on a failed 2-point attempt. But I think Nebraska gets the win. I think Nebraska has all this momentum. And I think after this Ohio State loss, we're seeing in this schedule prediction Nebraska is getting hot at the right time. They are pulling out win after win after win. And I think there's going to be another one. Although this could be a trap game for Nebraska, I think they squeak by with a win. Especially if we know what Maryland is actually capable of. I think they squeak by with a win, probably by less than 14 points. In the final game of the regular season, the rivalry with Iowa. And I think Nebraska, believe it or not, I think they get the win against Iowa. Although they do have a losing streak against Iowa, I think this is the year they end that losing streak. I think that Nebraska gets the win against Iowa, and they end the regular season 11-1. And now we are on to the Big Ten championship game because Nebraska's only loss is to Ohio State. And what do you know? The Big Ten championship game versus Ohio State. And once again, it's going to be a showdown. Adrian Martinez versus Justin Fields. And once again, it's going to be an offensive battle. It's going to be down to the wire. I think this may actually end up being a top 3 game of the year. But I think Ohio State wins the rematch. And Nebraska's only 2 losses of the season are going to be to Ohio State. And I think Ohio State makes the college football playoff by beating Nebraska in that Big Ten championship game. And I think Nebraska, they ultimately go to the Rose Bowl against whoever is going to win that Pac-12 championship, whether if it's Oregon or Washington or even Stanford. I think Nebraska will make it to Pasadena for the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all. So as you can tell, I am buying into the hype for Nebraska football. And I think everybody else should as well. Because I think Nebraska, they have the potential to maybe make it to a big-time bowl game. In fact, I think they make it to the Rose Bowl. Like, as I just got done saying, I think they're going to go to the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, to play whoever wins that Pac-12 championship, whether if it's Oregon, Washington, Stanford, even Utah has a chance to win the Pac-12. So comment your thoughts down below, like, share, and subscribe, and I am looking forward to covering Nebraska football all season long. Stay tuned. It's just getting exciting.